What's up, everybody, and welcome to my Exorcist franchise ranking. If you are just now joining me, or if you've missed the past couple of weeks of content, I have reviewed every single movie in this franchise, all five, from the original classic all the way down to the count 'em, two prequels. And now it's time to rank all of them from worst to best. So I'll put a card up here for those of you that might have missed those reviews. You can get caught up on all of my in-depth thoughts on each of these movies. I'm just going to give brief thoughts on all of these. Now, starting off at number 5, the bottom of the barrel, one of the absolute worst horror sequels I have ever seen in my life is Exorcist 2 The Heretic. Now, normally when I jump into some of these franchises that I maybe have not seen all of the movies with or haven't seen any of, there's usually one, maybe two, God help me when there's 3, hello Wrong Turn franchise, movies that the fans always tell me, that one's gonna suck. That one, avoid it at all costs if you can. God be with you when you watch that movie. And more times than not, when I finally sit down and watch it, it's overhyped. It's given way too much hate, and even though most of the time it's still not a very good movie, I end up going, you know what? It's not that bad. Not the case with Exorcist 2 The Heretic. I have seen worse horror sequels. I have seen worse movies. And you know what? I would even argue that there might be another movie in this franchise that on paper is worse as far as filmmaking goes. The technical aspects, the camera work, and the cinematography, all of that. But this is the absolute worst idea for a horror sequel that I have ever seen. Going from that original movie, The Exorcist, how they went from that and wrote the script for this movie and thought that it was going to go over well, beyond fucking me how that made it through the stages of the filmmaking process. Because you watch this, I mean, it's just everything. I mean, there's like psychic powers going on now with Reagan. There's this whole excavation in Africa where they got to go and find the secret origins of certain things. And there's these little hypnosis scenes. There's POV shots on grasshoppers. We got James Earl Jones waxing away in the middle of the desert trying to save the world through the insects. And it's just bizarre idea after bizarre idea after bizarre idea with one of the weirdest scores that I have ever heard in my life that has like this weird uplifting thing. I don't know what the hell they were trying to do with this movie, but I was miserable for the hour, 45 minutes, whatever the hell the runtime this was. Felt like 4 hours, and I will never watch this movie again. Now, the next 2 entries in this ranking are going to be the 2 prequels, and I'll be honest with you, it's like a razor-thin difference between them. They both have certain small successes that they do, and they both have very huge flaws in very different ways, but they are both equally forgettable and both just equally mediocre and unsuccessful as a prequel to The Exorcist. But one's got to be worse than the other, and I did find myself a little bit less entertained with Dominion, a prequel to The Exorcist. Now, for those that don't know the story, quick little catch up. They put this into production as a prequel to The Exorcist. They got a director and a writer on board for this movie, Dominion. They filmed the entire thing, got to the end of production, looked at all their footage and said, this is not gory enough, this is not horrifying enough, we need to start over. So they got Rennie Harlan to come in and do some reshoots that eventually turned into reshooting the entire movie with the exception of about 10% of footage. So you have 2 movies with the exact same overall plot that are very different movies. And Dominion is much more the kind of dramatic thriller of the 2. This is much more trying to be a exploration of a man's loss of faith and his eventual regain of faith. And it's trying to be a lot more kind of introspective. It's not really a horror movie at all. I mean, there's a couple of horrific sequences, maybe a couple of things going on in the plot that certainly will push it in that direction, but this really feels like a made-for-TV thriller. Good performances. I think that the performances in this are certainly the better of the 2. The villain and the eventual third act climax of, how things led into the first movie, The Exorcist, this one is by far the weaker of the 2. So when I'm asking which one I would rather watch, this one is not the one. Exorcist The Beginning is the reshot version of this movie, and it was the one that was released to theaters first. Financially failed, they said, oh shit, finished up the other one, released that one, and Dominion didn't do any better. But Exorcist The Beginning is the Rennie Harlan movie, and this one is definitely what I would call a horror film. Doesn't make it better to be a horror film, but certainly feels more at home being in this franchise, and certainly feels more appropriate for a prequel to The Exorcist for the tone and the style that they go for here. Performances are okay. They feel a little bit hammed up. You know, Stellan Skarsgård feels like he's putting a little bit too much forced gravitas into a lot of his line reading, but nonetheless, he's good here. I think that there is some good gore once in a while in this movie. There's some horrible CGI effects in Dominion as well that I forgot to mention. But the third act is what barely puts this above Dominion for me, because you do get an eventual climactic showdown between Father Merrin and the demon Pazuzu, who eventually is the main demon in The Exorcist. So it feels more like an actual prequel to The Exorcist. And the way that they had the makeup and the way that they did the voice and the sound effects of Pazuzu in the third act, it feels exactly like the demon in the original Exorcist. So for that element alone, it's slightly better than Dominion. But it is still a very, very weak, generic horror film that, to be honest with you, really does not add anything to the original Exorcist, which is what a prequel should do. Now we have the only two movies in this franchise that are even worth talking about, in my opinion. And of course, those of you guys that followed me around with my reviews know which answer is going to be here. For those of you just joining me, get ready for a surprise, because number 2 for me is the original Exorcist. Now, you can go check out my original review if you want to see all of my thoughts in depth about why I like this movie and why I don't think that it's necessarily the classic, for me personally, that everybody makes it out to be. But to keep my thoughts brief, I think that The Exorcist is iconic for the time. I totally appreciate what it did and what it continues to do for people as far as its legacy. I think that it is genuinely a movie that pushed the boundaries and pushed the envelope back in the 70s. But for me, I'm not really big on demonic possession movies and things like that, so it's already kind of in a bit of a handicap for me. And I find that the third act of the movie, where everything's going nuts, is really the only part of the movie that I'm really interested in. I think that the whole storyline with Father Karras and his loss of faith is interesting enough, but not quite strong enough for me to really be latched into that character. The whole intro with Father Merrin in the desert feels like a totally different movie that's just tacked on, and the prequel's job was to make that more interesting, and it failed, so still a negative for me. And you know, aside from the performance of Linda Blair and the makeup effects and just how visually shocking the movie is, I just don't really feel like it has a whole lot on its bones for me personally. So I like this movie, I appreciate it, I will certainly watch it again. This is a horror classic that I do like. It's just not one of the greatest of all time for me. But my number 1 is a movie that I think is criminally underappreciated in the horror genre, and that is Exorcist 3. This is a movie that came out and unfortunately has to pay all of the debts for Exorcist 2. They made another Exorcist sequel, and everybody that saw Exorcist 2 said, nope, no thank you, not going through that again. And it's a shame, because Exorcist 3 feels like a genuine storyline continuation from that original movie. It follows through on the ending with Father Karras and his sacrifice and the aftermath of that with other characters in the Exorcist franchise. And this is a totally different movie, which is what I love. This is not just wash, rinse, repeat, somebody else is possessed, now we gotta exorcise them by the end. This is a movie about a detective that is going around town and seeing all of these ritualistic murders that are the same MO of a guy who was executed like 15 years prior, and he eventually finds this locked away inmate in this insane asylum that looks like Father Karras, but is embedded by the soul of a killer that was executed. So you have a serial killer that can't be caught, can't be prevented, and can't even really be explained. And you also have the continuing demonic torture of Father Karras from the events of the first film. And you have, I don't care what anybody says, an Oscar-worthy performance by Brad Dourif here. I know I'm a Chucky fanboy, but I'm telling you right now, when you watch this movie and you see the lines and the delivery and the tension that Brad Dourif brings into this just by himself, it is a shame that this guy never got an award for this. I think it's his best performance. It's creepy, it's tense as hell, and it's so graphic without really showing you a whole lot. And this movie has what could be argued as the greatest jump scare of all time. I think that The Exorcist 3 is great. It's not perfect. There's certainly some slowness in the first act. I think that the exorcism in the third act feels a little bit tacked on. But apparently the director's cut ending is not any better. Pretty much everybody in my comment section said, no, this is unfortunately the better ending of the two. But as a horror film that nobody ever talks about because it's constantly in the shadow of the original movie, I'm here to try to set that right. If you have never seen The Exorcist 3 for whatever reason, check it out. Because in my opinion, Exorcist 3 deserves to be hailed as a horror classic alongside the original. So that's it, guys. That is my ranking of the Exorcist franchise. Be sure to stay tuned because we're going to be doing the Omen franchise next. You probably already saw the first review yesterday. If everything worked out correctly, we're going to do that over the next week, do another ranking for the Omen franchise, and then this Halloween on the 31st, we're going to do 31 on 31 with a whole bunch of supernatural and demon possession and haunting movies. So please hit the subscribe button so you do not miss out on any of that. If you enjoyed this and you want to contribute to this channel and help keep the lights on quite literally while getting exclusive perks and exclusive content and even early release content, please check the link down below for my Patreon page, and I thank you for considering that. Please like and share this video to help this video get seen more. And as always, guys, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.